Our guest today is with Footprint Capital. They go from 10 million all the way to 200 million in size.
Can you break it down how private equity looks?
The misconception that private equities fire all my people and they're going to replace it with theirs. That's not the case.
Describe run rate and what that meant.
Basically, how the business is performing on a monthly basis.
What is the smallest contractor size business that would be considering private equity?
I would say I would kind of put that at like 500,000 of EBITDA.
Platform versus add-on. What is this and what is the difference there?
Yeah, so a platform would be...
Let's break down multiples and then country club multiples and KPIs.
What we refer to a country club multiple is...
Welcome to Beers with Contractors.
All right, tradies, it is another episode of Beers with Contractors. Happy Thursday to you all out there in the interwebs. And Terry, happy Thursday to you, buddy. I know we talked a lot of shit to you and about you in your absence, but I'm glad to have you back, and it seems like you brought some good weather with you.
Hey, bringer of goodness. That's all I am.
For those of you that don't know, last episode, Terry was going to try to jump on, but the only privacy he could find at the airport was a lactating pod. It was all set up pretty well up until security got pulled, right, Terry?
It was a nice space. No, you know, down there in the middle of the Houston airport, only a nice, refined, quiet space was the lactation pod.
Sir, we're going to have to ask you to step out of the lactation pod. You know what's funny, though, is, I mean, you being a contractor, did you at least, look at it and was like, man, the construction of this thing is really nice. There may be a market for this. And
well, it was a prefabbed unit. I obviously did not go in it. I want that clear for the record. But it's a prefabbed unit. But, you know, it is kind of between that and the service dog, bathroom room in the middle of the airport. They had everyone covered pretty well.
Now, hold on, because I know everybody in the world gets to just see you from, the laptop up. So please describe to everybody exactly how tall and big you are, Terry.
Oh, I'm 6'3", and I do not fit in an airplane chair.
Yeah. So I can imagine some guy walking past you while you're in this lactating pod like, dang, that's a big woman.
Well, that's the best.
Then you got a beard.
That's the best part about flying is you get on that airplane and you're walking down that aisle and all you see is the eyes of people like, don't sit next to me. I have an empty seat. Not you. Not you. And you kind of make eye contact and you apologize and then just have an uncomfortable flight.
It seems like it'd be a good psych out. But hey, I am pleasantly pleased that you are back, sir. I missed you, buddy.
Good.
Well, cool. Well, hey, before we get started, of course, we know the routines. First off, let's give a few shout-outs to some of our followers. And we had another long list come in, but I'm going to keep it short, as I try to always do, and I'm just going to try to keep catching up with you guys. But thank you, Billy M. Boyle, Ripple, Matthew Kent, QQ, just 2 letters, Barefoot Carolina, Jamb Ader, Pipe Fighter, which I thought was an interesting name, and then just Steve. Thanks for subscribing and following. And for you guys out there, be sure to like, subscribe. And also, listen, check out our sponsors. I mean, they're great people. I know them personally. If you will just work with me as we have a few commercial interruptions, I'm glad that we find interest in connecting people out there. So, Terry, let's get our crayons out today. Today's conversation is going to be a hot topic, but one that I think a lot of people, including myself, think we know a lot about it, but we don't. And so I met this guest a few weeks ago, and I was like, what the hell does this guy do? And it took me a while. But then actually, no, I after several conversations, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get you on our show because there's so much value in what we're seeing in the trends. Because Terry, I think we're on the dawn of the super contractor. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have got some big names and everything coming through. So our guest today is with Footprint Capital. This is an independent investment banking firm focused on owners and operators or privately held middle market companies. So he's primarily responsible for leading deal execution and business development efforts focused on transportation and logistics, distribution, industrials, and B2B software. He brings 15 years of diverse experience, having held roles in both M&A, or mergers and acquisitions, and operations. He focuses specifically on the selling side of these deals. And some of these deals, Terry, they go from 10 million all the way to 200 million in size. We're talking about contractors here. And all of them are in the home services space. They range from HVAC, waterproofing, plumbing, electrical. And this has been such a hot topic for contractors. You can't get onto a Facebook group or, some news site talking about some acquisition now. So I think this is going to be a ton of value to our 6 listeners that we have. I'd like to welcome Christian Olson of Footprint Capital. Christian, welcome and love the shirt, sir.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me on. Terry, nice to meet you.
Cheers. Pleasure.
Yeah. So, Christian, I know that I poked around some fun about what do you do? But then after we got to know each other, I was like, gosh, the value that you bring to our listeners. So before we get into this, I know you've got a diverse background going all the way back to your grandfather in the trades.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that and kind of what led you into this wild world of mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, as a little kid growing up in Minnesota, obviously it's cold. So there's 2 seasons, right? There's winter and there's road construction, right? And, I was kind of blessed. My grandfather was a longtime tradesman, kind of after World War II, instead of taking the GI Bill, he decided to go into the trades and ended up being kind of a very skilled welder and plumber, pipe fitter. And actually it's kind of cool because he was part of, I kind of put in my bio, right? Like the Southdale Mall in Edina, Minnesota, which is where I grew up. That was like the first indoor mall in the country. And then he was one of the, him and his crew were the guys that kind of built that. And the all famous Metrodome up in Minneapolis that, had the roof collapse. That wasn't him. That was the roof. But yeah, I just remember kind of as a kid going to all the Union Hall and going to the Christmas parties and all that sort of stuff. And then of course, being a contractor and working in the trades. I mean, he had tools in his car, tools in his garage, tools in the basement. That way he didn't have to walk up and down the stairs, to find the right tool. So he had 2 of everything. And as a kid growing over there, we'd always have, find stuff to build and that sort of stuff. So I kind of picked up, that, and that kind of has some background roots and I like to build stuff and do projects around the house and all that sort of stuff. But, my wrench is an Excel spreadsheet. So that's kind of my tool of the trade.
Well, hey, they say the pen is mightier than the sword.
Yeah.
Right. And the spreadsheet has become probably one of the mightiest instruments in business now, especially in the world of selling, buying, businesses, mergers, all that stuff. So I know you went to school for finance, right? And then you kind of had a journey before landing at Footprint Capital, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So when my education, I did my undergrad in finance and technology management. And, I know, Will, we kind of talked a little bit on some of the software stuff. So I kind of had some familiarity with some of these ERP systems, the dirty word ERP, and now it's kind of ServiceTitan. Or I've had, we should tread lightly, but I've had a client refer to it as Service Titanic just because of the complexities and stuff that goes along with that. But followed my way from there into grad school and then took a couple of corporate jobs in logistics and then went into Ashland Chemical and kind of worked globally across their enterprise. And, our group was kind of responsible for evaluating and analyzing kind of any sort of CapEx or M&A transaction over $500,000.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. On that side. And then, and
still, holy smokes.
Yeah. And then, what kind of found me into the trades is I actually then, after kind of doing a couple corporate jobs in that type of framework, had a role that was offered to me within Ashland down in one of the businesses. And I found myself running the building and construction adhesives group along with transportation adhesives. And so I did that for about 3 or 4 years and then came across the guys at Footprint that I'd kind of known in Columbus. And, they were just kind of starting out and jumped in with them. I remember my second deal was actually a small little plumbing, drain, and business up in kind of the Akron, Ohio area. And when I started kind of evaluating that and looking kind of the buyers, we thought it was going to go to somebody up there that wanted to kind of take it over, similarly. However, when I was kind of doing our market research, came across a couple of groups and one of them happened to be North Branch Capital, which at the time, maybe a lot of people don't know North Branch, but North Branch was the integral part of kind of forming what is now known as Heartland Home Services. And that's, since our transaction, they went and acquired, I think, 55 other contractors kind of throughout what I call the Midwest from Chicago all the way to Ohio and have about a $500 million revenue portfolio of brands kind of scattered throughout the Midwest.
Wow.
So got to learn a lot about it through that little deal. What turned into, what was a small little business, small little plumbing and drain business, quickly turned into learning a lot about the space. And then it had kind of spiraled from there. And one deal led to another, and we've done probably over 10 plus in the space now across all different, types of industries and the trades, and just getting ready to close a couple more here, come a couple months in the spring.
Very nice. Christian, can you kind of walk us through the difference between private equity and what in investment banking, and why is it important to the contractors to know the difference?
Sure. Absolutely. That's a great question. A lot of them kind of get misconstrued, especially kind of with our name being Footprint Capital.
Yeah. And by the way, Christian, that's why I wanted to hear from you guys, because I think there's a lot of white noise around this topic in the construction world. And we just think they're all lumped in, like venture capital, private equity, investment banking. It's all the same, but it's not. Sure. So, break this down for us.
Yeah. So kind of what I call like traditional private equity are groups that, they're investors. And that's how they know. And they basically kind of, had a career. And I also kind of say, hey, this is kind of capitalism at its purest form, because if you don't perform, you're out. Uh-huh. And so what these guys do is they go out and they raise money from pension funds, I would say like institutional investors, like insurance companies, pension funds, state teachers retirement programs, firefighters, kind of retirement plan, all those types of municipalities raise the money. Mm-hmm. And then basically they go out and invest it in privately held businesses, with the goal to make a return that's superior than investing in the stock market. So that's kind of private equity, in its kind of purest form. Now with that, they have a specific model where they have to deploy that capital in a certain amount of time. So call it, 1 to 3 years. And then in kind of 3 to 5 is when they kind of say we need to harvest, right? And kind of produce a return for our shareholders, because they're locking up that capital for a 3 to 5 year type of position. Mm-hmm. They have to deploy it and produce a return. Versus our group, we're on the investment banking side. So we actually, help facilitate those transactions with private equity, with strategic buyers, publicly held companies, et cetera, on behalf of the client. So typically in our engagement, we're hired by the contractor to help them do that deal and help them either bring on a partner, 100% liquidity, all various different shapes. You've heard kind of probably an ESOP formation, all sorts of transactions. We're hired by the client to kind of meet their needs and basically get a transaction and a structure in place that they're looking for. So that's a 2-minute or so overview. The process, I would say, kind of soup to nuts from an engagement to an actual transaction is probably six to 9 months, maybe 12 months, kind of depending upon the goals and what may need to be prepared for getting it, quote unquote, ready to market, because the investors have a specific way that they look at things.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you bring that up, because Christian, as we go through these questions, it'll probably go through call it the basic glossary of an understanding of how we got here versus, hey, understanding how do I even get to the point of using a company like Footprint to help me facilitate a transaction versus the exit, right? And one thing that I think you bring up that's really important here is, on your end, being the facilitator, you got the attorney that's going to help with the contract language. You have the CPA that's going to help with the tax stuff, but you don't have anybody that's truly facilitating and guiding the transaction to make sure that you're not just totally getting burnt here as a seller. Yeah. And that's what I love about your company's mission and all of that. And that's why I think it's valuable. But let's go back a little bit. We have seen this massive wave in the last 5 years to the in-home service just trades in general. Yep. Your HVAC, your plumbing, your electrical companies from these investment firms all over the country. Why is that? Because I feel like everything has ebbs and flows and bubbles and things like that. But I mean, are we in that? Like, why the hell is all this money coming our way?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And kind of being on the ground floor, like we were fortunate to find ourselves in with our client. It was right. Actually, I remember it because we were under LOI, and basically right after we signed the LOI, the whole COVID shut the world type of down, at least in the US happened. That was back in kind of March of 2020. And so what happened then, and there was early on like, hey, this is a good investment thesis. And then after COVID, these businesses kind of basically survived and thrived, and everybody was kind of picking up on, hey, I'm in my home, the world is changing, we're going to a remote workforce. So now like the typical homeowner that leaves at 8 and comes back at 5 and is really home on the weekends was now there 5 days a week, stressing the plumbing, the electrical, the HVAC systems, right? And dialing the dial, up and down. And so that was kind of one wave of it. And then kind of even backing up a little bit further is kind of going back to my technology background. we started to see some of these trends as mobile phones became more, prolific, and everybody quote unquote had a smartphone. And the typical contractor, I guess back when, they were using carbon paper, right? And, using the flip phones, but that, back kind of in the 2010 to 2015 timeframe. And as that became more prolific, and products started coming out like Service Titan and everything started becoming connected, now you can actually like grow and scale, these contractor businesses by putting several of them together, running the same operating system, the same financial type of P&L, all the different communication strategies, everything kind of rolling up. And so it really just became a conduit to help this whole consolidation wave that we're seeing today and allow for scale. Those were kind of two of the big, important things. So then along with it, like the maintenance programs and the recurring revenue and the marketing and a lot of that stuff.
Oh, yep.
Started to facilitate, what we're seeing today.
So in a sense, you're a partner who's bringing in funding to help expand the business, bringing in better processes and systems that the small single owner might not have been aware of.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So it allows you to, add multiple locations and branches and, and then the sophistication on kind of the SEO and the Google and the SEO, all that sort of stuff is kind of really what I would say kind of focused in that investment, into this space. And of course, we've got the aging workforce as another factor.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know we're going to get into some of those kind of key performance indicators here in a little bit, Christian, because,
Sure.
Most people look at a CRM. Honestly, I've done it before. Contractors, sometimes we just look at CRMs as an expense and a pain in the ass, when really it could be an instrument to drive multiples, which we're going to get to here in a little bit.
Sure.
Because of the systems and processes. But so now, obviously, we've seen a lot of change just in the last few months. So what is some of the updates from the mergers and acquisitions market post-election? Like, what are we starting to see in the next 12 months?
Sure. So, no, that's a good question because, from our vantage point, and this maybe backs up like a couple years back, we saw what I would call like a little bit of a slowdown and some softness. And primarily what had kind of transpired just from a macro level was, you had obviously rising interest rates with mortgages, et cetera. Well, what follows that is consumer financing. So, what typically, if you were going to finance a $20,000 HVAC unit at 0% versus 10 or whatever now, it's a little bit different story from a consumer perspective. So we had that. And then we also had, what I would call like a pretty weak shoulder season in across the Midwest, in that we had very warm winters. And there really wasn't a, hey, turn my furnace on, stress the system type of thing. So it was really a couple mild winters basically stopped that whole kind of replacement cycle. And so we saw some, what I would call like some slowdown in a lot of the consolidation and to sort of the volume of transactions that were getting done. There were some ones getting done for sure, but obviously just the whole wave that we saw from like 2019 till 2022, when a lot of these platforms were in kind of platform creation stage, I'll call it, slowed down, and the buyers were getting more and more specific on specifically what they're looking for, what they're buying, rather than just buying a business to buy a business and we'll integrate it later. And so you had a lot of these platforms that were starting to quote unquote, like digest their businesses that they've acquired, over the last several years to really make them operate and scale and et cetera, kind of prep them for the next cycle. And so what we're seeing now is kind of coming into 2025 is a pretty active market where you have a lot of, outreach and I would say kind of the market is coming back. And as long as everything kind of stabilizes with tariffs and, some of the other kind of quote unquote political noise, we should be in for a pretty solid and robust M&A front as it comes into 2025.
Now, Christian, I know Will's dealt with private equity before, but for the contractor who's out there running their business, maybe they have multiple locations and they're starting to get stressed. Can you break it down how private equity looks within the relationship of owning their business, being involved? Like, are they giving up everything, all control, or is it a partnership? If they're fearful of it, how would you talk to them?
Yeah. So I would say, and kind of one other kind of comment I had too, was you had a lot of, there was a lot of these like roll-ups or consolidated platforms that never kind of sold. So it's like once private equity's game, it's like very similar to like flipping houses on HGTV, right? You go in, you buy the property and then you turn it and make it better and you flip it. And there wasn't a lot of transactions at the top, meaning these bigger platforms. Now that we've had some of that, they're starting to unlock, new buyers, new outlook, et cetera. And so that comes in all different flavors down to the contractor. It really kind of depends, to Terry, to your point. Like if you're, that's one of the factors that we provided in our services, is really getting a good understanding of the contractor, what he's looking to do, what he's looking to get out of a transaction, and then kind of aligning him with the right partners and the right groups that value that type of a relationship. And so that can, range from the businesses, I say, big enough to maybe some minority growth capital infusion, which looks more along the lines of like a debt offering.
Yeah.
Or, a control transaction, which is anything kind of greater than, 50%. And kind of depending upon the age of the owner, et cetera, you may be looking for, 50% type of a partnership, or 51, basically 49%, or basically, hey, close the deal. I'm going to hit the beach in 1 to 3 months and we're out. And so that kind of allows us to go out and find the right type of a buyer, that you're looking to do a deal with. It kind of helps. That's the framework for us as advisors to make sure we're finding that right partner.
So even if a contractor is looking to fully exit, they're ready to sunset, retire, and they want to walk away, and they don't have anyone to step up, they can work with you all, and that's part of that process.
Correct. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's kind of, from our vantage point, the earlier the better, because that allows us to prep the business, and I want to say marketing the business accurately, but positioning it for a sale, meeting kind of our clients' goals in mind. And some of that is, like you said, that outright sale. And a lot of these, a lot of contractors say, hey, I'm going to sell my business and I'm going to go to the beach, et cetera. But in reality, the biggest thing is unpacking, and a buyer will dig right into this right away, is how much work is he doing in the business, and can we allow him to do that? And so part of our value proposition to the client is to make sure that we're kind of solving for that. And sometimes we've had engagements, as an example, where we've signed up a client and 2 years later, we actually executed the transaction. And the rationale behind that is because, we need to make sure that there's a management team in place, and we kind of give a run rate where we can elevate somebody into that chair and make a couple different things, make a couple different tweaks, or, we talk about KPIs, make sure we're tracking KPIs and managing the business the way that a buyer is going to manage it post-close. And so, what that leads to is highest value execution of the transaction versus getting all the way to final close and you're not getting a deal done, which is a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of value in some owners who are day-to-day active, or you have people like
Correct.
Will who bring nothing to the table.
Hey, shots fired. And that's kind of true, Terry. So, hey, but that helps my valuation, I think. Let's find out from Christian here in a second. So, by the way, Christian, all business owners, it pays to be the guy leaning against the broom when you get to that level, too.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Christian, I know for a fact contractors always show up fully prepared to be sold every single time, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So, we had this funny conversation last week about like these fire sales, man. They're either in panic, something's wrong, they kick the kids out of the business and they're like, screw it, I'm going to the beach, take it all. And they're like, here, make something work with it. We know that is like the worst thing, of course, because contractors were good at kind of getting caught in the whirlwind. I mean, what are like the top 3 things a contractor can do to just even prepare to make sure that fire sale doesn't happen?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, not to give a shameless plug, but if you want your full day-to-day job to be...
It's okay.
Yeah.
Plug away.
Yeah. Talking, negotiating a purchase contract, like, learning all this stuff. I mean, it is like a full-time job in order to execute an M&A transaction. Will, I'm sure you've got some stories from your transaction, but, in all reality, like you said, we like to be in as early as we can so that we can help kind of get our hands on the business, understand the financials, what are the levers, pricing, margin profile, KPIs, all these different things that kind of what a new buyer is going to put in place if it's an institutional investor. And then also too, we got to remember, like, these guys are really good, and that's all they do is look at deals. They're going to find everything. Mm-hmm. Our objective is to make sure that we're preparing our client to make sure that they're ready to face, a firm that's maybe they're investing, $10 billion under management, right? And they've got a platform that's $500 million in revenue, right? At that point, they've probably done 20 plus transactions. And so they're going to know what they want, what it needs to look like, and how they can integrate that business seamlessly without having disruption. Because the last thing they want to do, and we're in a service business, right, with contractors, is the people are the most important. So I'd say, a lot of times what we see is the misconception that they're going to come in and private equity is going to fire all my people and they're going to replace it with theirs. I mean, that is, at least at our level and in the industries that we deal with, that's not the case. And so I would say the top 3 or 4 things is number one, kind of be honest about kind of your role in the business. And if it's something where you're still working, 60, 80 hours in the business or 40 to 60, you got to start maybe taking a step back and say, am I working like in the business or on the business? And putting people into those roles and empowering them so that, you can kind of say, hey, here's my top 3 or 4 kind of key management team that is going to, be available to lead this business after I exit it at a certain point in time.
Well, so Christian, real quick, because you said a few things that I think we could go back, actually. I was jotting down some notes with Terry here that I think could be very helpful because I think they're super, super important to the person even out there, say they're doing just 1.5 million, but they aspire to do 910, and that's a valuable company. And I don't care if you're doing yard drainage, you're doing 10 million a year. I mean, there's value there. So one thing in particular, you said run rate. So describe run rate and what that meant, or what you meant by that. Tradies, running your small business can be demanding. You got suppliers you got to work with. You're managing crews. Hell, you're chasing sales. It's a lot to take in. Listen, if you want to grow your business, you got to stop working in it and you got to start working on it. So that's where my friends at Foundation Rescue Supply come in. You're not just getting foundation repair products and waterproofing products and air quality control products. With their nationwide distribution, you're getting a partner who knows how to help you scale. And that's why I use them. The Foundation Rescue Supply team has industry knowledge that will help make your life easier. You get the tools, the trainings, the systems that you need to move the needle. You want your sales team to close more leads? Done, because they have the proven process for that. You need your crews to work smarter, not harder? Done. Their installation training will get you out there and rocking and rolling in the field. With Foundation Rescue Supply, you're not just buying materials here. You're buying a better business system that they have helped create. And you sell more, you install more, and you grow your team. So the bottom line is this. You get best industry pricing, you get field productivity on track, and you get more revenue out of everybody on your team. So this is your chance to step up, scale up, and thrive. If you are ready to make that happen, head to foundationrescuesupply.com, check out their catalog, and speak to my friends, their team, how you can take beyond the products with your company with Foundation Rescue Supply.
So typically a buyer, I've got my shirt on here. That's probably another question for you or Terry here in a sec, but it's coming.
That's coming up. Terry's got that one coming up next.
Everybody's famous term, EBITDA. So making sure you have a strong understanding of EBITDA and both reported EBITDA and adjusted EBITDA. And, typically a buyer is going to be looking at adjusted EBITDA on the last 12 months of the business. And then, on a go forward basis, kind of looking at your run rate, which is basically how the business is performing on a monthly basis, month over month, year over year, and a go forward trajectory. Am I growing sales? What do those months look like on an outbound basis, kind of into the future, because they're buying the cash flow of the business at a certain point in time, looking to grow that into the future. And so that's kind of how we would, I would call run rate.
Gotcha. Well, cool. Thank you. And I think that's a good segue. And before, Terry, we get to your next question, though, I find that a lot of contractors they struggle with even trying to get their number from their CPA, to say, hey, by the way, I just need my EBITDA. Yeah. Now, granted, there's a lot of contractors don't know what their EBITDA is.
Yeah.
They just know to ask for it. But when you're stuck and you've got this ancient CPA, let my CPA listeners out there, none of you. Hey, but it's like, damn, where do we start? I mean, is that something you guys help with, or it's like, man, do we just need to find another CPA and they're all overbooked and it's tax season? I mean, what the hell is going on with this? How do we find it?
Yeah. Well, and yeah, so that's an interesting point, but I'll kind of give you my, a little bit of an anecdote. Like a CPA, because they typically deal in a world called GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, EBITDA is really not recognized as quote unquote a GAAP measure. So therefore they're kind of hard to be willing to put their thumb on adjusted EBITDA. And so that's kind of our job typically when we get an engagement is looking at the financials, running them through kind of our model, and then calculating adjusted EBITDA. And the difference from adjusted EBITDA to the regular reported EBITDA, obviously, I'll kind of say it. So it's earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation amortization is the full term for EBITDA. But in reality, it really, means this is the cash flow stream or the profit stream that, a new buyer or investor is going to assume on a go-forward basis. And that's reported EBITDA. Now we get to adjusted EBITDA. Sometimes we get up in there where, again, I'm not with the IRS nor have any affiliation, and nor do I care because we keep it all confidential. But, stuff in the business that is not going to be a
disclaimer.
Yeah, exactly. Disclaimer there. On the adjusted EBITDA side, when we're kind of working with the owner to go through, we're looking for, items that are one time in nature. Maybe at the end of the year, you buy 3 or 4 trucks and you're going to need one 6 months out. Well, I got a deal and I could depreciate that and tax savings. We're going to go through and we're going to make quote unquote adjustments to get to a regular type of a profitability stream that a buyer's going to want to, assume.
Yeah. Well, and this is a great segue, Christian, because what you're really working with out there, and contractors do this constantly, myself included. You're building this business, and a lot of us have this growth mindset where it's like, we're going to grow, grow, grow. And then next thing you turn around and realize you built a massive business. And sometimes it can feel like a curse and a job, but it's like building a house. There's value in this business. I don't care, even if it's down to the phone numbers, there's something of value in that business.
Absolutely.
But what you're describing and maximizing for people out there is really the EBITDA is working out multiples.
Correct.
And I think this is perfect to talk about it because specifically multiples. I'd love to hear your definition, but also what the heck is a country club multiple?
Yep.
It's kind of a buzzword that's popped in. And then any relevant KPIs around that. So let's break down multiples and then country club multiples and KPIs.
Yeah. So really, the multiple kind of definition, the way that I understand it and the way that we kind of utilize it is basically this would be a comparable transaction. And so you've got the cash flow of the business established as adjusted EBITDA. You sell it for $10 million and you're $1 million of EBITDA. Well, that's a 10 times multiple. Now, we'll like what we talk about and when we refer to a country club multiple is the guy you're playing golf with today. He sold his business for 12 times. So, I'm worth 12 times. I'm in the same type of business. Well, your business could be at 10% gross profit margin. You could be the one that does all the work. He's basically playing golf all the time. He's got his management team in place. There's a lot of other factors that quote unquote kind of drive that multiple. When we say comparables, we're looking at an apples to apples basis, not, apples to oranges, like in kind of the country club multiple space. And so we dealing with owners, we need to get comfortable, have them get comfortable with, hey, here's what we can, we could project your multiple based off of this EBITDA and these factors kind of going through live transactions. And then, I was going to say, when we talk about KPIs, making sure you've got like the metrics like average ticket and turnover on your employees and, kind of calculating and looking at these things on a sometimes daily, weekly, monthly basis as you are kind of managing your business. Because, when you're going through this type of a transaction, you're now going to an institutional environment where these guys do this for a living and they're going to come in and put systems and processes in place. And they're going to want you to do it if you're going to be on board to drive that business forward or, your next level of management team needs to have that solid understanding. So that does drive, a multiple and or purchase price.
Well, that was a totally different answer than I was expecting on the country club multiple. Actually, Terry caught some of this conversation on the way into our studio today. So I was talking to this business that we're going to be helping down in Texas, and they're going to take it big, man. They're going to go do franchises. They're going to grow. It's going to be awesome. But then it was like they booked a meeting, and they picked up the phone. They're like, oh, I totally forgot. I'm on the golf course at Cabo right now. And I'm thinking, yeah, you're not going to grow that thing very far, bro. You haven't even broke 7 figures yet. Come on. Like, we got work to do. Then you can get to the country club and start bragging about the numbers. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think this is good because if you're listening out there and you're wondering, go look these things up. Good God, the internet is full of such great information if you know how to use it, because it could mean generational wealth for your families. And I think we're all heading there as contractors. Because hell, the contractor was always thought of being like the guy that's going to be working till he's 60, broken down, no money, when now we see contractors, retiring early with multiple generational wealth, and it's awesome. But now let's transition a little bit into kind of the exit strategy of kind of the business, right? And what I mean by that specifically is we've gotten an LOI, letter of intent, right? And we're working through the business. Now, take us through the negotiation process through the exit. And what does that normally look like for most companies?
Yeah, so it's interesting, especially too, if you kind of look at the contractor space. I mean, Will, it, like you have a lot of friends all over the country. You guys have your Nexstar meetings, or what is it, like CEO Warrior? I mean, a bunch of different, EOS, like these kind of what I'd say industry groups or business training type of groups where the leaders will get together, discuss best practices, et cetera. And so what we've seen in our space, especially in kind of the home services and contractor space, is with so much capital on the sidelines, and meaning these private equity firms have so much money to invest, they've hired so many people, and I kind of used to try to solicit, you to sell your business and basically kind of try to eliminate us from a process or source it through their friends, or, hey, we sold to this guy. These guys were great. So one thing for certain is that typically that's how a lot of these, consolidated platforms have been growing and scaling, is they've been sourcing the businesses from the guys they buy, their friends, et cetera. And, and not really listing, set type of a broker or investment banker like the services that we provide. And so what that happens is, the LOI shows up and they sign it, and you march off into diligence, and, you don't really know what your value is. And, obviously you've got a dynamic here where, as a seller, you're trying to sell it for as much as possible, and a buyer is trying to buy it for as least as possible to up their returns. And so kind of going back to your country club multiple, there's a lot of different factors that kind of go into that. And so from our perspective, it's kind of doing the preparation and working through so that we're the ones that are going out to find the right fit and the right buyer. And we're creating kind of what I'd say competitive dynamics to ensure that we're getting the best deal, not just in terms of value, but partnership, structure, exit time frame. I mean, all these different factors, the management, kind of buy in to solidify and get the best deal possible for our client.
Well, and you don't know what you don't know until you get into it. And, I can imagine these contractors look at like a homeowner trying to do a DIY project, right, and handle it all themselves, and they end up just screwing it up. And then they're like, don't worry, I don't need anyone else when I go get some of this private equity money.
Yep.
Isn't that such a dichotomy, Terry?
Yeah.
It's like,
it's so true too. That's right on. Yeah.
Like, I'm the contractor, and then you got like 90 undone projects at the house. By the way, love you, Dad. I know you listen to the show. I know Mom loves you too, but I know what your house looks like. But Christian, on that note, like when we're talking about this kind of transition, and Terry, actually, you brought up a good point. You don't know until you've done it. And I can say that I have been through one variation of this. And I felt, number one, it was pleasant, probably like, having a baby, even though I have never had a baby. But looking back at the moment, like, it's arduous. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot that happens during due diligence. The skeletons are coming out of the closet. No business is perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just matter of fact. But it does go back to this point where, like, bringing somebody in early on, knowing your goals and your purpose and what the hell you're trying to do with a succession plan is just so important. And I tell contractors all the time, listen, you're going to exit your business whether you want to or not. You're either going to die, or you're going to have to sell it or give it away to your kids, or somebody's going to get it. You can't hold on to it forever, right? So with that being said, Christian, as we're going through that process, do you find that a lot of larger M&A deals require the, call it, seller to stick around for multiple years, kind of handcuffed back to that business based on KPIs? Do you see that often?
Yeah, I mean, it really just kind of depends, to be honest with you, kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, where, if you kind of position the business properly through kind of bringing your people up and empowering them and kind of having that next level of leader ready to kind of take what you've put in the processes and the culture and the brand that you guys have, you have as a contractor put in place, instill that in that next generation or that next level of leadership, then you could be looking at a a 1 to 3 month exit or a 3 to 6 or, that within a year. Or, there may be an instance too where you got the train on the tracks, this thing is going. And Will, you and I kind of talked about this in preparation where, hey, there are certain folks that are out there that are great at building a 0 to, $1 million contracting business. Right. And then there's folks that can take that from $1 million to $5 million. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's a skill set. And then, I think where the rubber meets the road is to go to 5 to 10 to 15 million. And now you're pushing 20. Well, that's a whole different ball game, right? In terms of skill set and development and leadership and all those things that need to be basically learned and absorbed by the contractor. Oh, well, and by the way, making sure you're still doing quality work and growing people, et cetera, right? So in that instance, it's kind of like, I want to grow this business to $10 million. That's a goal. Well, I'm at 1 million, right? What does it take? And it takes, you've done it a couple times, right? I think two for somebody else, one's for yourself.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the first one was for me, but ended up being somebody else's in the long run. But no, I'm glad you said that. Let me echo that message because I know a lot of people around the country. And my skill set, and I'm just going to say skill set, is 1 to 15. That's it. I've got friends that have business do 20, 30 million, but man, like that's where I can thrive and really do well. And that's why I found a financial partner through, a merger and acquisition that to bring in those skill sets that will take me from 15 and above. Yep. Because I'm just not that guy. Right. And I think that's another thing we probably should be talking about here is that realization that sometimes you got to look in the mirror and be really like, hey, can you take it that far? Terry's shaking his head because he knows well, sure as hell ain't taking it that far. Hey,
I'm amazed you got to where you're at, buddy.
I know, right? If you need to go back to episode 1, you'll meet Sydney, my wife, and that's how I got that far.
Hey, Christian, and I don't know if you've already talked about this, but what is like the smallest contractor size business that would be considering private equity?
Yeah. I mean, I think it really has to, we kind of in our industry say there's got to be a little bit of meat on the bone.
Right.
And, I would say I would kind of put that at like 500,000 of EBITDA would be kind of a low target, I mean, obviously, you can be smaller, but at the same time, once you kind of back up, below kind of 500,000 of EBITDA, you're, now it's kind of another term I've heard is kind of the chuck in the truck, right? That type of, contractor out there. And those like, it's highly levered to the business owner. He's doing the invoicing at night, doing the estimates, on the off time. And that's just not a business that somebody as an investor really would want to kind of take on as an investment because it's risky, right? If something happens, the whole like, hey, get run over by a bus type of logic. Mm-hmm. If you lose your operator, then what are you left with as an investor?
Yeah. So you have to have people in place. It can't just be you. Do they come to you? Do you go to them? Like, is there a singles bar where y'all are meeting up at?
So, at some point, sometimes I wish. Well, I was at the wastewater, I was at the wastewater equipment technology and transport show. So that would be, the closest thing we get to a singles bar in our industry or some of these trade shows. But, typically we have like within our network is typically your trusted advisor is who we get a lot of our referrals from. So that would be your accountant, your attorney, your financial advisor, wealth planner, and then obviously like former clients that we've done work for and just, introductions and people that we know and kind of have that trusted relationship with they could refer us in, and certain times too, we have get into some competitive dynamics, but for the most part in our industry, it's like, Will, you've been through, it's a lot of work, right? And so you got to like really, gel and mesh with the firm, the advisor firm that you're going to be, I may be calling you at 10:30 at night on a weekday or through the weekend. Like I was, this whole weekend I was working on an LOI negotiation as an example, right? So it's one of those things where, time kills deals. And so when it's ready to go, we got to go. And so you really got to like the person and gel with the person that you're going to be, it's a 6 to 9 month relationship that we're going to be talking all the time. And so having good rapport and having an investment banking firm that you can know and trust and, that type of thing is really important.
So, Christian, you have a great case study, and I hope we can talk about this because I'm having this conversation right now with a contractor in Georgia and another one in South Dakota.
Yep.
Their brand is highly attached to their identity and who they are. They're in the branding. They're all over the commercials. They're on the side of the trucks, all this stuff. And, I know somebody out there is thinking, well, it's so much tied to me, especially based on our conversations so far.
Yeah.
But I hope we can talk about the Green Bond deal because this is one of those that you worked in. Ron was and I know Ron, haven't seen him in years, but we met several times, just such a great person. He was highly attached to the brand, and that enhanced his company's valuation. And I just want to unpack that a little bit and how that deal went, if you can talk about it to a certain degree.
Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah. That was a situation where, and again, kind of talking about kind of from the advisory's perspective is, understanding the brand, the value. And I kind of listened to a couple of your podcasts. I think the one was with Dan Antonelli, I think it was Grasshopper Home Services or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great story.
I need you to help me with my brand. It's PH&A contractor. Well, there's really no value. To somebody from not in that market, okay, I'm sure there's one in our market, right? And so kind of putting, some sort of building that brand equity and investing in the marketing over time. And with Ron's business now, his face was on that, but he was actually obviously he owns the Green Bond Steyer's, marketing agency who you guys just had on the podcast. I listened to that one too. And we know that very well as well.
6 degrees to Kevin Bacon, man. We know everybody.
Yeah. But they had actually started kind of planning for what's life like after Ron. And so starting to do some emojis and some video to kind of, transition kind of him out of the day to day. Now he still is known all throughout Columbus. Anytime you go anywhere, if he's got a hat on, it's the basement doctor.
Yep.
But for disguise, if he doesn't wear a hat, you're probably not going to recognize him. So that whole value, and it's the impressions and the jingles, and that's a value, and finding the right partner that is going to value that brand, continue to invest in that brand, and see that as kind of a core competency in that market is would kind of align with the right partner specific to the client, if that's really a valuable piece of the business.
Well, thank you for that, Christian, because I think we see that where our identity as a home service company is so tied to the business, and it's well, how could I ever give that away? Or that essentially shackles me to the business, but it can enhance it. So before Terry brings us home, and we'll get to see how Christian did on the prep documents after negotiating an LOI after all weekend, I missed over a question here. Yeah. And this is actually including for me. We didn't get into this for scaling companies, but you mentioned platform versus add-on. What is this, and what is the difference there? I know we may be going back to the first section, but
sure,
I want to talk about that real quick.
Yeah, so a platform would be basically, the way that we kind of define platform is, typically that's a business that's 2.5+ million of EBITDA, has the scale, they've got the management team, they've got the systems that can be basically replicated across other businesses in their industry. And I'm just kind of speaking broadly, and then I'll kind of bring it back to contractors. And so, that's the type of business where, you're the first investment, into that business. I think there's 60+ consolidation platforms in kind of HVAC, plumbing, and electrical, several in kind of the foundation repair industry. When we looked at Ron's business, that was a platform investment because that was the first investment in that space outside of the groundworks consolidation strategy. And, you kind of see it across the nation with HVAC, plumbing, and electrical. These guys have picked, typically it's kind of a leader in an MSA or the city or the region that they're in, and they've taken an investment, and they go out and buy other smaller businesses to add on to that business and kind of roll out their systems and processes and technology. Whereas, once these platforms get to scale 500 million of revenue, 2.4 billion of revenue, all these different kind of slots in between, then they're looking for add-ons, right? So they're looking to expand, whether it be regional or within their certain city limits. So they're buying smaller businesses to add on to that platform.
Yeah. So, and that was actually perfect. You leaned into technology. which is funny because like once you get all those systems and processes in place, you can kind of collective bargain and lean into those to scale the business faster. And sorry, Terry, I keep putting you on the bench, my man.
It's okay.
Sorry. But like, what's some of the coolest like up and coming technologies that people are starting to leverage to help scale and things like that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this, this is kind of one of the ways that we've seen this play out is, everybody kind of knows this, right? Your big corporations are slow to move. They move like an iceberg, right? So, what we found from kind of, being in the mix of the transaction side of it is that, we had a client that kind of essentially rebuilt his business over the last couple of years due to some unforeseen issues. But when he did it, he said, hey, you know what? I want to do it with less people. And I want to do it with all these new technologies that have, come available. And so as we're kind of showing the business to other different types of these platforms, you're like, whoa, that's really cool. We don't use that. How do you like this? Right. And kind of using these being an early adopter and trying to do kind of less is more rather than having that accounting bookkeeper that's been doing the books for 35 plus years. Well, she's great at like inputting payables and receivables. Can she schedule jobs? Can she dispatch? Well, now with AI and some of these tools, I've seen, these AI calling agents that can do multi-channel, whether it's inbound, outbound calling to call and try to deliver leads, right? Or the performance product to show my guys what they're actually making on an hourly basis, or a product called TrueCast, that we've...
Yeah, TrueCast is cool, man.
Yeah.
That is a cool product.
Kind of, to basically kind of dovetails onto the call-by-call management and multiple devices across your whole entire enterprise, and, actually having a video or a FaceTime with a client without having to do any ads. So there's like a myriad of different, whether it be like dashboards or, all that stuff that's kind of broadcasted through the company so that employees are now seeing what's going on and kind of creating transparency. And I think, that type of an investment and starting to kind of utilize those tools, not only does it help you kind of cut down on some of that back office work that everybody likes as a contractor, but, allows you to then start scaling and growing your business. So, yeah, so this is kind of an interesting time, especially with, I think we see in the news all this AI stuff and what does this mean for me and all this sort of stuff. But it really is a way to take people from doing what I call tasks to now like empowering them to actually help drive decision-making and improve the business and do their job better. So think of it as a tool.
Well, thanks for the plug there, Christian, on performance, but also some of the other ones you mentioned, like TrueCast, that's just a kick-ass product. It's awesome. Jeff over there and just so many more. But it also means like, hey, we're getting more results out of the people we have on all these products, which is increasing multiples, which is obviously having an effect on EBITDA. And I love to geek out. So I know you have your ear to the ground with all these new tech products too. So it's kind of like, well, if I need to know something new that I can geek out over the weekend and learn from, I'll just hit Christian. But cool. All right, Terry, I got the drum roll for our last question. The famous question. Let's see if Christian read it in the podcast.
Well, Christian, I hope you did, because Will loves to surprise people with this, but he is the patron saint of screwing things up. And
I need a crown for when we ask this question.
A low tiara is on your way. Is there a time that you can look back and say, I screwed that up so bad, but now you can look back and say, well, I learned something from it at least?
Yeah. So, no, so actually I did read, and I was just like, all right, well, how do I sift through everything to boil it down to one thing that's relevant?
The piles of screw-ups that are yours.
Yeah, and you didn't specify, is it like professional or is it personal, or, but and I played hockey a long time ago, so I had a lot of screw-ups.
We're just going to send this short directly to your co-directors as soon as it airs, Christian. No, go ahead.
Well, no, and I thought about this, and in my career we talked about my background and kind of went through some of the corporate M&A roles, and Will, you're probably the same, technology, kind of geek out on deals. Like I was a deal guy, like I love it, and it's exciting, it's exhilarating. And then an opportunity came up when I was working at Ashland to kind of take a step in a different direction and take this role down in a business and operating a business. I'd say within the first 6 months, I was really reluctant and kind of my head wasn't in the right spot. I'm like, oh, this is kind of like going back to my old hockey days. Like I just got cut from a team, right? And at the end of the day, if I look back on it, that was probably some of the most important 3 years in my career that kind of helped me be and prepare me for what I'm doing now, because I was running a business. I was in charge of sales and pricing and gross profit margin and running a business and contracts and commercial contracts. So I learned a whole different skill set that now, when I go into an engagement, I'm sitting there kind of thinking like I'm the operator. And that's how we're kind of digesting and understanding the business is, we're putting our marketing materials together. It's understanding how do we improve the business? How is this going to grow? How's it going to scale? And kind of help to convey the message of what has been done up to today into what could be the future and how do we get there? And so that was kind of I look back on it and it was like hey, you kind of got cut from the team, but it actually kind of turned me into a really good, coach, kind of GM, because really our job, if you take a sports analogy, I mean, we're like the coach or the general manager on a football team or a hockey team. I mean, we've got our players, our CPAs, our accountants, and we're kind of the glue that's kind of putting that whole thing together to execute on a transaction. So,
yeah. Well, man, I'm glad to hear that story, Christian, because I had one of those humbling moments myself in my young days, and they can be defining. And then also, you ever wake up and wonder, how the hell did I end up on a podcast drinking beer with two Neanderthals?
Yeah.
It was because of that screw up.
Yeah, I know.
And here you are, buddy.
You're paying for it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Christian, listen, how do people get a hold of you?
Yep.
I mean, obviously, Footprint Capital, Google is nice, but how do people reach out to you for more advice and information?
Yeah, just footprintcapital.com is our website, and then my email is colson, OLSON @footprintcapital.com, and then just shoot me a note or shoot it into the show, and I'm sure you can kind of redirect. And quite honestly, we like to make sure that we're getting kind of a look at everything. Whether if it's somebody that's maybe doing $500 to $1 million of revenue, like I'd still want to take that call because 3-4 years down the road, that could be $5-10 million, right? And we can help them get to where they want to go. And if you're offering, I'm always a big believer in networking, and networking is two ways. So, you come to me and I'm going to bring something to you back and kind of share in that growth and that experience. So, would love to have, any of the listeners out there, that are contemplating about thinking things. It's never too early to have a discussion.
Yeah.
And, we're not high pressure, et cetera. It's for us, it's our most valuable asset, just like contractors, is your time. And so, we want to make sure that we're allocating our time in the most effective manner. And we'll happy to work with you and give guidance to what are the blocking and tackling things that need to do to get where you want to go.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I get approached and courted by all sorts of firms all the time, but they're not really representing the seller side. Not that you guys do that 100%, but that's your main focus and mission. But also, the people that you have helped that I personally know was kind of an indirect kind of background check on you guys. So I am happy that you guys are in the world, Christian. I am happy for this content that you've helped us put out because there's just so much misinformation and spam calls coming from all these firms of contractors. So there's value. We will most definitely put in, the website, the LinkedIn, all that into the show notes. But otherwise, sir, I appreciate you and your cold beers and your shirt. Wait, where's the hat, Christian? We got to get the hat real quick. We need to get the EBITDA hat on. There we go.
It's back because we're on camera, but flip it around and it's still just as confusing.
That's right.
So was that a gift or was that a custom job?
So the T-shirt was from my wife because that's all she heard about, me on the phone when I'm talking with my headphones in is EBITDA. And then, we had an event with our Footprint team and one of our colleagues, surprised us all with EBITDA merch. So
nice.
Hey, that's a sexy word. That's funny. Well, Christian, I appreciate you so much jumping on the call. You are truly a connector in the industry. Appreciate that. Yeah. Terry, I am lukewarm about you being back, but I'm really happy. Just kidding. Actually, just so the listeners know, Terry refilled the beer fridge today in his absence because he was gone. So thank you, Terry. But otherwise, we will see you guys next week on another Beers of Contractors. We appreciate you guys. Be safe out there. We'll talk soon.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beers with Contractors. We hope you enjoyed our chat as much as we did. Before we say our final goodbyes, a friendly reminder. Beers with Contractors encourages responsible drinking. If you choose to enjoy a beverage during our time together, please do so in moderation and only if you're of legal drinking age in your country or state. Furthermore, the advice and insights shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only. Always consult with professionals and experts in your field, and be sure to follow local laws and regulations regarding licensing and permits. We're here to help, entertain, and inspire, but your safety and compliance are important. So, as you head out into the world of construction and contracting, remember to build responsibly and make decisions that stand the test of time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll catch you on the next episode of Beers with Contractors. Until then, cheers to your success.